September 1944, Eastern France. American columns pressed forward through villages and fields, engines humming, maps creased from constant use. Ahead lay a stone fortress dominating a road junction, walls thick, angles cruel, guns in place to sweep every approach. Inside waited 1,500 German troops, under a major who believed surrender was betrayal. He had gathered fragments of units, artillerymen, infantry, clerks turned riflemen, and welded them into a vow. They would not yield. General George S. Patton preferred speed. Speed saved lives, he believed, by ending wars sooner. When scouts reported the fortress blocking supply routes, he considered options. Bypass it and risk convoys. Besiege it and lose time. Or end it quickly. He chose the quickest path and sent an officer forward under a white flag, terms plain and professional. Lay down arms. Become prisoners. Live. The reply returned sharp and theatrical. Tell Patton he would have to kill the major to take the fortress. The words were meant to echo. Officers nearby expected anger or theatrics in return. Patton offered neither. He listened, nodded once, and answered with 4 words that carried finality. I can arrange that. Orders followed with precision. First, encircle completely. Roads sealed. Paths watched. Fields denied. Second, mass artillery and register targets carefully. Not noise. Not terror alone. But method. Third, call air support for specific strikes. Fourth, bring loudspeakers. The defenders would hear what was coming and when. The schedule would remove hope and replace it with certainty. Finally, Patton clarified intent. This would not be a lingering ordeal. It would be decisive, overwhelming, and brief. Night fell with engines idling and guns aligned. The fortress loomed silent, while inside doubt crept. Loudspeakers crackled in German, calm voices outlining hours and phases. Artillery at dawn. Airstrikes after. Infantry to follow. Surrender remained available. Time passed slowly. Men whispered. Some prayed. Others cursed their commander's pride. At first light, the guns spoke together. Heavy shells struck measured points, again and again, breaking stone and confidence alike. Counterfire flickered and died as American observers corrected aim. 2 hours later, aircraft arrived, diving precisely, bombs walking across command posts and stores. Secondary explosions tore open chambers thought safe. The main gate collapsed. Throughout, the loudspeakers continued, reporting facts, not taunts. This section breached. That position destroyed. Surrender now and live. Small groups emerged, hands raised. The major ordered them shot. The sound of those executions traveled farther than speeches ever could. By mid-morning, the fortress was ruined geometry. Breaches multiplied. Resistance fractured into pockets without coordination. American infantry advanced through every opening at once, tanks firing directly into stone, engineers collapsing holdouts. It was not chaos. It was procedure. Where Germans fought, they were crushed. Where they paused, surrender followed. The major retreated to his bunker with loyalists. When Americans broke in, he raised a pistol. A sergeant fired once. The challenge had been answered exactly as stated. The remaining defenders surrendered immediately. Less than 12 hours after the first shell, the fighting ended. American losses were light. German losses were severe. The road junction opened. Medics treated wounded on both sides. Patton walked the wreckage without celebration. He ensured prisoners received care. He reminded his troops of the rule. Offer surrender. Destroy resistance. Never confuse the two. The story traveled quickly. American units understood the lesson. Patton meant efficiency, not cruelty. German commanders learned another. Dramatic defiance was not leverage. It was permission. Those who accepted terms lived. Those who demanded death received it. The fortress delayed the advance barely half a day. Hundreds died needlessly. The major's name faded. The lesson endured. When Patton listened to words, he took them literally and acted. Historians later argued about alternatives, ethics, and proportionality, but the event resists abstraction. It shows how clarity shapes outcomes under pressure. Patton did not escalate out of spite. He executed a plan aligned with stated conditions. He signaled mercy before violence and certainty after refusal. The defenders were not deceived. They were informed, warned, and given time. Leadership choices carried immediate consequences for subordinates. Honor rhetoric could not substitute for logistics, morale, and command coherence. The fortress offered strength only until opponents applied tailored force. Once breaches opened, courage without coordination dissolved. War rewards preparation, not speeches. The episode also underscores responsibility. Commanders choose whether their soldiers live to surrender or die defending rubble. When survival is offered and rejected, accountability follows. Patton's approach, cold as it seems, reduced suffering by ending resistance swiftly. Hours replaced weeks. Predictability replaced chaos. Many lived because some surrendered early. The lesson is uncomfortable because it strips romance from defiance. It asks leaders to measure outcomes honestly and accept that words can authorize actions. In September 1944, one statement invited destruction, and destruction arrived on schedule. Encirclement tightened through the afternoon as engineers blocked culverts, felled trees, and wired crossroads. Artillery battalions rolled into position with practiced calm, crews laying trails, setting charges, and registering ranges against stone. Observers climbed church towers and hills, mapping angles and fall lines. Nothing was left to chance. The fortress was treated like a problem to be solved, not a symbol to be debated. Inside the walls, the major convened officers beneath flickering lamps. Reports contradicted his certainty. Ammunition was finite. Radios failed intermittently. Rations were counted. Junior officers asked about surrender again, citing the broadcast. The major dismissed them, invoking duty and oath. He ordered examples made of wavering men. Shots echoed in corridors, and resolve drained away faster than blood. Night broadcasts continued, measured and factual. Timetables replaced threats. At dawn, heavy guns. At mid-morning, aircraft. At noon, assault. The clarity was corrosive. Some soldiers planned escape routes. Others wrote notes. A few clung to belief that stone would endure. At first light, the ground shuddered. Shells struck pre-selected points repeatedly, chiseling masonry into dust. The defenders learned quickly that returning fire invited immediate punishment. Counter-battery radar and observers erased guns within minutes. Smoke rolled inward, carrying certainty with it. After hours of pounding, aircraft arrived precisely as promised. Bombs punched into command spaces and storage rooms. Secondary blasts rattled chambers and nerves alike. The main gate collapsed outward, exposing courtyards to fire. Loudspeakers narrated events with chilling accuracy, offering surrender corridors marked by flags. Small groups emerged, hands raised. Medics waved them through. Word spread that surrender meant safety. The major attempted to reassert control, ordering loyalists to block exits. When shots rang out against would-be escapees, the effect backfired. Men scattered, hiding weapons, waiting for chances to survive. Infantry advanced methodically, not rushing, exploiting breaches created by guns and bombs. Tanks fired point-blank into apertures. Engineers cleared obstacles with charges. Flamethrowers ended resistance in bunkers designed for another century. The fortress ceased to function as a whole. It became fragments. Within the bunker, the major received broken reports. He insisted on holding. Loyalists dwindled. When Americans entered, his pistol rose once. A single shot answered. The challenge concluded without ceremony. By noon, the position was secured. Prisoners were counted. Wounded treated. Routes reopened. American losses were light. German losses were heavy. The timetable held. Afterward, Patton addressed his staff briefly. Surrender was offered. It was refused. The response followed. He ordered humane treatment for prisoners and medical care, without distinction. Efficiency ended the fight. Professionalism ended the day. The episode rippled outward. German units learned that refusal carried predictable consequences. American units learned that preparation shortened battles. Loudspeakers, schedules, and precision became tools as important as shells. The fortress became instruction, not legend. The lesson cut deeper than tactics. Leadership choices decide who pays for pride. When commanders equate honor with death, soldiers inherit graves. When clarity replaces theater, wars compress. Patton's method stripped illusion from defiance and replaced it with arithmetic. Hours versus weeks. Lives spared versus lives spent. The calculus was brutal, but it was honest. The road junction reopened. Convoys rolled. The advance continued. Stone returned to rubble, and memory returned to doctrine. The fortress had spoken once. The response ensured it would speak no more. Later assessments compared alternatives and found none faster. A bypass would have risked ambushes. A siege would have consumed weeks. Negotiation after defiance would have signaled weakness. The chosen method minimized exposure and ended uncertainty. Critics later asked whether mercy required more persuasion. Supporters replied that mercy had been offered plainly before violence began. Soldiers who surrendered described relief, not shame. They spoke of exhaustion and fear under a commander who equated loyalty with death. Many survived captivity and returned home. Those who resisted longer did not. Outcomes followed choices with unforgiving clarity. The operation influenced subsequent negotiations across the front. When Third Army emissaries appeared with terms, German commanders listened. Some surrendered immediately, citing the fort. Others hesitated and then accepted. Fewer demanded death. Predictability saved lives. Patton's staff refined procedures, integrating schedules, loudspeakers, and precision fires. The approach did not replace maneuver. It complemented it. It framed surrender as a rational option and resistance as costly certainty. Warfare became communication backed by force. For modern readers, the discomfort remains. Taking words literally can feel cold. Yet ambiguity kills when shells fall. Clear offers and clear consequences compress suffering. Leaders who choose drama gamble with other people's lives. Leaders who choose clarity own outcomes. The fortress episode endures because it reduces war to choices, statements, and responses. Speak carefully. Decide responsibly. When you dare someone to kill you, be prepared for acceptance. In September 1944, acceptance arrived on time, on target, and ended a fight that never needed after the fortress fell. The immediate battlefield grew quiet, but its consequences began moving outward across eastern France. Third Army columns resumed their advance within hours, supply trucks rolling through the junction that had been blocked the previous day. Maps were updated, timetables adjusted. The fortress was reclassified from obstacle to cleared terrain. For Patton, the operation was finished the moment resistance ended. But for others, it became a reference point. Staff officers documented the sequence carefully, noting how preparation, communication, and timing had compressed what might have been weeks of fighting into a single morning. Engineers photographed breaches. Artillery officers recorded shell expenditures. Air units filed strike assessments. Everything was treated as data, stripped of emotion, because the next fortress or town might demand the same solution. Among German prisoners, the mood was bleak but calm, shaped by relief at survival rather than anger over defeat. Many spoke openly during interrogations, describing fear of their own commander more than fear of American firepower. They explained that surrender appeals had sounded reasonable, even merciful, compared to orders demanding death for symbolism. Several junior officers admitted they would have surrendered immediately, if not for executions carried out to enforce loyalty. Those statements later circulated through German units, quietly undermining the romantic appeal of last stands. American soldiers, for their part, absorbed a different lesson, one centered on predictability rather than bravado. They saw that surrender offers were genuine, but refusal triggered a machine that moved without hesitation. This clarity reduced fear in combat, because outcomes felt governed by choices rather than chaos. Patton reinforced this perception intentionally, repeating to subordinates that mercy preceded violence and followed surrender. He believed confusion prolonged wars, while certainty shortened them. The fortress example became a teaching case inside Third Army headquarters, discussed in briefings and after-action reviews. Officers debated details, but no one questioned the speed of the result. The junction remained open. Fuel flowed forward. Armored units maintained momentum toward the German interior. Momentum, Patton argued, was itself a weapon, exhausting enemy decision-making faster than shells. In subsequent encounters, German commanders more frequently accepted surrender terms, citing concern for their men. Some explicitly referenced the fortress, acknowledging that resistance would only invite annihilation. This pattern saved lives on both sides and accelerated the collapse of organized resistance in the region. Historians later noted that psychological effects often outweighed the physical destruction itself. A fortress could be rebuilt, but the certainty that defiance would be met decisively lingered. The German major's name faded from records, but his decision echoed through countless later surrenders. For Patton, there was no satisfaction in the outcome, only confirmation of method. He emphasized repeatedly that surrender offers were not bluffs, and neither were threats. Words mattered because they shaped expectations, and expectations shaped survival. The fortress stood as a grim demonstration of that principle, carved into stone and memory alike. As Third Army pushed onward, the war's arithmetic continued to assert itself. Choices made by commanders translated directly into hours saved or lives lost. The fortress battle was not unique, but it was unusually clear. It stripped leadership of romance and exposed responsibility in stark terms. For soldiers who marched past its ruins, the lesson required no explanation. They understood that survival often depended on choosing when not to fight. The fortress, once a symbol of strength, became a warning etched into the road ahead. Every convoy that passed carried not only fuel and ammunition, but a story. It was a story about certainty, consequences, and the cost of dramatic defiance. By the time Third Army crossed deeper into Germany, that lesson had already done its work. The fortress was behind them, reduced to rubble, but its impact moved forward with every mile. Patton rarely mentioned it again, yet its logic informed countless decisions afterward. In war, he believed, clarity was kindness, and delay was cruelty disguised as caution. The fortress proved that belief in stone, smoke, and silence. Those who heard the story understood that challenging Patton meant accepting his answer. And his answers, once given, were final. The road junction stayed open. The advance continued. The war moved relentlessly onward. For the men who survived inside the walls, captivity replaced death, a harsh but merciful exchange. For those who did not, the choice of their commander had written the ending. The fortress thus became less a battlefield than a case study in responsibility. Its stones taught that defiance without strategy is merely sacrifice. And sacrifice, when unnecessary, is the heaviest burden leadership can impose. That understanding traveled faster than artillery shells and lingered longer than smoke. It shaped decisions long after the fortress itself had vanished from maps. In this way, the battle ended twice, once in rubble and once in mines. In the weeks that followed, the fortress ceased to exist as a military problem, but it remained alive as a reference point. Maps marked it simply as cleared. Yet conversations across headquarters and mess tents kept returning to it. Officers spoke less about the rubble and more about the decisions that had led there. The event became shorthand for a principle that required no slogan. When surrender was refused, certainty replaced negotiation. Patton never framed the outcome as a victory of will over stone. He framed it as inevitability. He reminded subordinates that war punished ambiguity. When commanders spoke dramatically, he listened carefully, then acted exactly as stated. There was no room for symbolic gestures once timelines were set. The fortress demonstrated that clarity, once established, moved faster than sentiment. German units retreating east carried the story with them. It traveled through rumors, interrogations, and whispered warnings. Some exaggerated details. Others softened them. But the core remained intact. A commander refused surrender, demanded death, and received it promptly. Thousands survived because they ignored rhetoric and chose captivity. Hundreds died because one man valued defiance over arithmetic. This effect mattered more than the guns themselves. Psychological pressure reshaped later engagements. When American officers arrived with terms, German commanders weighed them carefully. Many concluded that survival for their men mattered more than oaths already broken by a collapsing state. Surrenders increased. Resistance shortened. The war compressed. For American soldiers, the lesson was equally sobering. Overwhelming force was not about cruelty. It was about speed. Speed reduced exposure. Exposure killed. The fortress illustrated how preparation transformed violence into procedure. It also showed that professionalism did not end with surrender. Wounded prisoners were treated. Captives were fed. The line between combat and custody was enforced deliberately. Ruthlessness belonged to battle. Restraint to its aftermath. Historians later debated whether Patton's approach was uniquely his, or simply an expression of American doctrine amplified by personality. Evidence suggests both. Doctrine emphasized combined arms, encirclement, and surrender offers. Patton added tempo, certainty, and literal interpretation. He removed the emotional middle ground where negotiations dragged and casualties accumulated. That removal saved time and lives, though at the cost of confronting uncomfortable truths about leadership and responsibility. The German major's decision remains the fulcrum. Had he accepted terms, 1,500 men would have lived through the war. By refusing, he ensured hundreds would not. His intent may have been honor, but intent does not outweigh outcome. Leadership is measured by consequences, not declarations. The fortress teaches that lesson with brutal efficiency. Patton understood something many leaders resist. Words commit resources. Statements shape reality. When a commander declares a willingness to die, he implicitly volunteers others to die with him. That authority demands restraint, not theatrics. The major chose spectacle. Patton chose resolution. After the war, veterans who passed the ruins remembered the silence more than the noise. The quiet after surrender felt heavier than bombardment. It was the weight of realization that decisions made in rooms echo across lives. Many reflected that the fortress delayed nothing meaningful. The advance continued. The war ended. Only the casualties remained permanent. Modern readers may search for nuance, for alternatives, for softer endings. Those questions matter, but they cannot erase the core lesson. When force is overwhelming and outcomes are certain, prolonging resistance increases suffering without altering results. Mercy offered early is mercy denied late by defiance. Patton's method forced that reality into daylight. The fortress no longer stands, but its lesson persists wherever leaders face irreversible choices. Speak carefully. Decide responsibly. Understand that defiance invites response. Patton did not invent this rule. He enforced it with precision. The German major learned it at the cost of his life. His men learned it at the cost of freedom. Others learned it in time to survive. As Third Army rolled onward, bridges fell, towns surrendered, and the war's end drew closer. The fortress became just another mile marker behind them. Yet its impact moved ahead, shaping negotiations, shortening battles, and reducing casualties. It proved that leadership clarity can be as decisive as firepower. In the end, the story is not about Patton's anger or cruelty. It is about accountability. He offered life, received defiance, and delivered consequences exactly as promised. There was no deception, no excess, only execution of stated terms. The arithmetic was unforgiving, but it was honest. The fortress fell in September 1944. The German major died there. His name faded. The lesson did not. With Patton, challenges were not deterrence. They were authorization. Understanding that difference saved lives, ended fights, and carved a warning into history. That is the final legacy of the fortress. If you know any other unsung World War II heroes or powerful events that deserve the spotlight, let us know in the comments. Your suggestion could be our next story. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and join War Lens for more in-depth World War history, battle breakdowns, and legendary war stories.